But November 5th, we will have an election. And after that, all of those markets goes away. The other problem is that, yes, election markets have seen growth, but most of that growth comes from this massive sort of bubble of interest around political markets.
This episode is brought to you by Access Protocol. You'll be hearing more from them later in the show. This episode is sponsored by MyPrize, which is the first multiplayer casino where you can watch, chat, and play together with your friends. Use the referral code Lightspeed when signing up to receive a 150% deposit bonus for up to $300. We'll hear more from MyPrize later in the episode. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Lightspeed. I'm your host, Jack Kubanek, and today joining me I have Kyle DePepe from Hedgehog Markets and Nigel Eccles, who is building BetHog. I'm very excited to have these guys on the podcast today because we're going to be talking about one of crypto's most interesting trends, most maybe polarizing kind of consumer apps at the moment, which is prediction markets. Kyle and Nigel, first of all, thank you guys for joining the pod. I'm glad to have you.
No, thank you. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So I'll start out just with a quick intro to both of you. So Kyle is the CEO of Hedgehog Markets, which is a prediction market that is built on Solana. Mert caught me slipping in our recent roundup, and I didn't give you credit as being the first, I believe, or had forgotten about Hedgehog Markets, but big in the Solana community, is integrated with Blinks and things like that. Kyle was previously at places like Goldman Sachs and T. Rowe Price. Nigel Eccles is CEO and co-founder of BetHog, which is a betting platform being built on Solana. It's in kind of a testing phase right now. And previously he was CEO, I believe, and co-founder of FanDuel, which is, the major sports betting platform in the US. And I think also involved in some legal action with them. I think I saw that on Twitter, which will spare asking you questions about that for now, Nigel.
I've got a 216-page complaint if you want to read it in your spare time.
Great. Yeah, good. A good weekend read. We'll link it in the show notes. So the reason I wanted to have you two specifically on the pod to talk about prediction markets is that, Nigel, you publicly have been a bit of a prediction market skeptic, and Kyle, you obviously are the CEO of a prediction market platform. So I think it'll be interesting to just have a little bit of a dialogue between you two and be able to, kind of weigh the pros and cons. But before we do all of that, I think it's important to just define our terms here. Because something that Mert and I talked about on our roundup is, like, are prediction markets not just betting platforms? So I guess I'll pose this to you, Kyle, and then Nigel, you can maybe come in as well. But what is a prediction market and how is it different from a betting platform of the kind that already exists?
To me, I guess prediction markets are finding the odds that the community thinks that something will happen. So it's, I guess, not always necessarily like correctly predicting the truth in a sense. Like, the odds won't necessarily be 99%. Just like when you have money line odds with a game, a team might be plus 500, which has, lower chances of winning, but there's still a chance that they could win. So it's just finding the truth of what the implied odds are of something happening. And typically, financializing that is just a better predictor of that outcome. So whatever event it is. And I guess, how is it different than other betting platforms? I would say at a high level, it's the same, right? If you look at sports and sports odds, the idea is that you're looking at the implied odds of that team winning a game, for example, or a certain amount of points being scored. It's just that prediction markets are now applying that same stuff to more long-tail markets, basically political elections right now, which is obviously the hot topic. But you can really apply it to whatever. It's just, whatever bet you want to make with somebody else, you can basically look at what are the implied odds and will somebody take the other side of that bet at those implied odds.
Nigel, does that comport with you? what is your understanding of what prediction markets are?
Yeah, so prediction markets are just betting markets. I don't think there really is a distinction. So one of the first, if we call it a prediction markets, is Betfair, which launched in 2000. I used to work there. I was part of a competitor, Flutter, and we merged with them in 2001. And in the UK, there's no regulatory requirement for the operator to have they can take bets on one thing or not on another. So Betfair can take bets on literally anything, and has taken markets on a whole range of things. And so there's no real distinction between Betfair and say Polymarket or Hedgehog Markets. I'd say the distinction, maybe more in the US, is that a prediction market is usually referred to something outside of sports. So it's non-sports betting market. And it usually has a veneer of, shall we say, sort of truth finding. It's, Betfair doesn't really give a shit about that. All they care about is volume, and then people are betting on it. They don't, even if you go to their site today, it's actually very hard to understand who is the favorite, how the odds have been moving, because they don't really care about that. Whereas prediction markets do care a lot more about that, because there's a really big user base that's never going to place a bet, but wants to go and check the odds. So I think that's a kind of distinction that sort of developed over time as well.
So it's like sports betting for like smart people, I guess, or
I wouldn't. It's for people who are not into sports, right? Like, it's funny.
Yeah.
So let's take Betfair as an example. So here we have a market. It's open, not only in the UK, but lots of other countries. So they take bets on anything. The non-sports, non-racing, racing is a very big category. That's horse racing and dog racing. But non-sports, non-racing, I would say is best maybe hits 1% of their volume max. It's actually probably a lot less than that. Like you look at the US betting market that they're taking, they'll take a lot more in cricket than that. They'll take a lot more, and a lot of these things are tertiary sports you would consider. So in these markets where you've got all of these things, so the vast market, as with where internationally, where it's not constrained, wants to bet on all these other things. Only a small minority of people really want to put serious money into what you would consider to be prediction markets, which is sort of politics and everything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And before sports fans flood my mentions, I'm a big sports fan. I don't bet on them, but I'm very excited for the NFL season coming up.
Yeah, okay.
For instance. So just to clear that up. But now that we've defined our terms, I guess, Nigel, I'd like to go into kind of the tweet that I saw that spurred this episode, which came together over the weekend while I was at the airport. So thank you guys for responding last minute. But you wrote a long tweet that was a little bit contrarian to, I think, what a lot of people in crypto are saying right now. And it boiled down to, prediction markets are going to have difficulty surviving past the election. But can you just, I guess, for the sake of listeners, walk us through a little bit of what that argument was?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say quite that. What I'd say is prediction markets are in a predictable bubble at the moment, because if we look at them, and let's just use Polymarket's data, 18 of their top 20 markets is politics. And by volume, politics, or not just politics, but elections, is like well over 95% of their volume. That ends November 5th. Well, maybe with, I think I mentioned, with maybe with a little bit of a tail if one person doesn't lose and doesn't accept it. Usually a little bit of a market on that. But November 5th, we will have an election. And after that, all of those markets goes away. The other problem is that, yes, non-election markets have seen growth, but most of that growth comes from this massive sort of bubble of interest around political markets. And so that's where people are coming in. Now, post November 5th, I'm not saying that prediction markets are going to go away. They've survived before and they will survive after. But and there's a few people on Twitter seem to be intent on drawing this straight line from this growth, or even, accelerated growth. That's ridiculous. Like, that is not happening. We're going to see election markets go to zero. after November 5th. And we're going to see non-election markets drop substantially because all of their news or all of their buzz is being driven by the election. Now, I expect there will be prediction markets, and I think some of them will be successful post-election, but we're not going to be talking about them, right? Like, and anywhere near the level we are today, and we're not going to start talking about them again anywhere near the level we are today until 2028. That's my prediction.
So I have Polymarket open here, and just to sorted by most volume, you have election winner, popular vote winner, electoral college, will Biden finish his term, the Super Bowl, sports, a rate cut, congressional elections, does RFK Jr. drop out? So like a lot of them up near the top are political prediction markets. Why is that, Nigel? What about political prediction markets makes them interesting for people to bet on?
So for something to be a good market, you need a couple of things. First thing is you need something that's a sort of binary, clear outcome. It happened or it did not happen. And that immediately eliminates so many things, like these sort of running news stories where, well, A or B, but it actually turns out to be C. Like, what's the future of Ethereum? Like, huge discussion at the moment. How would I create a market around what the future of Ethereum is? Will this or this happen? Or we could say, well, what about a market? We could boil it down and what happens to Ethereum price, but there really is a market for that, which is just buy Ethereum or short Ethereum. So the vast majority of the world is messy and isn't easy to put into markets. The exceptions, number one, sports and horse racing, right? Very clear cut. Who won the Super Bowl? It's never been in contention. Who won this game? Sometimes in contention, right? But pretty much, we've got accepted rules for it. Finance is another one. Like, you could have a market on whether the Dow will open or close, and those are really big markets in their own right. Then we have elections. Again, pretty clear cut who won generally. And so those are good. After that, it just gets really messy and it's really hard to create a market around that. And then the other problem on top of that is most of those things don't have the other thing that you need to have a good market, which is a lot of people interested. So that's the first thing, who were willing to risk large amount of money on it. So, that's sort of like, you might have a story that becomes like a headline story. And even if we could formulate like, the classic kid stuck down a well story, right? This is a bit of a morbid one. Like, will they save the kid, right? It's a running news story. I can settle it. But are there lots of people who are willing to put lots of money on this? Not really, right? Only slightly because it's morbid. But there's also sort of, I think they call them hanging cliff stories, that does it fall, right? Doesn't have the amount of broad interest and willing money to make an interesting market that, say, the Super Bowl does, or really, even the preseason NFL games have. Like, they get real money. These news stories just generally don't. And the other thing is, those bettors are kind of, they are in that ecosystem that, every weekend they'll be watching football, they'll watch NBA. And so it's kind of part of their whole zeitgeist. And the people who want to bet, that's kind of where they're at. So for there to be markets for these other things, we'd have to create this sort of new class of people that are just like super into news and want to bet on it like every day with real money. And certainly currently, that's a pretty small group of people.
Kyle, just broadly with that take, elections and sports is where most of the interest is. Beyond that, it might be hard to draw a lot of liquidity. Just what's your take on that in general?
I would honestly say that for the most part, I agree. And I think like these are things that we constantly think about, and I'm sure Polymarket is as well. And if they're not, then they should be. But yeah, it's really what does happen after the election. Like we saw this in 2020. We're seeing this now. Like, you have that hype that gets amplified because, the news picks it up. They report Polymarket charts, right? You get that nice sort of data visual of how the odds have changed over time. They love to talk about whenever, Trump and Kamala odds flip each other based on whatever. It's just good talking points. We see the same thing with crypto Twitter, right? It's like whatever is the hot thing of the day, that's what's on the timeline, right? And I think to that point too, we definitely are in that sort of prediction market bubble as far as narrative, people talking about it, maybe even investment and deal flow. But even when the elections end, like they will still be around. And I think like what we're trying to think through and solve for is, what will those markets look like? So I think like most people think of prediction markets in terms of like a club or AMM where you're trading these yes, no shares. But kind of like we mentioned at the beginning, prediction markets are just betting on different things. So we're trying to think through how can we make it where, right now there isn't really a good way for anyone to spin up their own prediction markets. And so that's something that we're trying to solve, which there's a lot of nuance there, which is why it's difficult, and we can kind of go down that road if you want to. But that's one thing we're kind of looking into. And then maybe like a different market style. So like, with sports betting, the casino is sort of acting as the house, and they're setting those lines. And the idea is that they're effectively market neutral. They're acting as a market maker, and they take the spread. So is there a different fee model or a different way that you could sort of monetize prediction markets that people haven't thought of or aren't thinking about, because you kind of see something and that's how you always think of prediction markets. And so we're trying to expand and have different market types that we're offering, in addition to letting the users be more engaged with sort of the product creation.
Mm-hmm. Like, do you think that the primary like volume markets on Hedgehog are still going to be politics and sports post-election?
I mean, definitely not politics. I think sports will be. So I think, is there, a different model that we can carve out that is slightly differentiated? Are there long tail markets that, sportsbooks don't want to, allow people to bet on? Like, I've often heard of people that, will sort of find an edge, and then they either get capped on how much they can bet on sports books, or they get rid of those markets entirely because the sports book isn't profitable because of it. And that's sort of where, crypto can come into play. If you can create a more peer-to-peer club trading model or just peer-to-peer betting, if there are enough people that are interested, that market becomes self-sustainable. If there aren't, then kind of the same thing will happen with what's happening with traditional sports betting. And so I think sports will always be high volume. So if there's a way to carve out that niche on chain that people are interested in, great. But it's tough to compete. You have FanDuel doing a majority of the volume in the US. DraftKings, I think, is in number 2, and then everybody else is pretty far behind them. And then like Nigel touched on early on, you can't really operate these on-chain crypto markets per se in the US. So, you're doing geo-blocking, you're having, click to say, I'm not in these locations. You're doing a lot of things to sort of prevent users from doing that, which makes it hard to compete in that market when you can't operate in that market. So I think, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I guess like one answer, which I don't even think this is a great answer, but I do think we're early. I mean, if you just look at total TVL on chain, it's very small. So if people do think that, we're going to be more crypto centric and more crypto native overall in the future, then, this is more of a, I guess, long-term bet that as more and more people come on chain, as more and more people use USDC, they might look for these options and these avenues. But, the user experience honestly is great for traditional sports betting. So trying to bring that volume on chain is going to be a hard, I guess, cookie to crack there. But I think going after long tail markets and more like user centered markets is something that we're thinking about and trying to engage with, similar to like Pump.Fun, right? Like it's people that are just sort of spinning up these little micro communities around tokens. Over 90% of them are just getting rugged by the dev or going to zero, but clearly there's a business model there. So why can't we do something similar with prediction markets?
And the one piece there, Kyle, I would maybe push back on is I think politics can be a place for betting markets post-election. Because if you when you say prediction markets only work for sports and politics, I feel like that's a lot of news. Like that's open up the front page of the New York Times and it's going to be politics day after day, even after the election happens. And, every streaming service right now is competing to be able to have streaming rights for sports. Like these are really, really big markets that people care a lot about. So I guess, Nigel, I'll pose to you then, like, is that a knock on prediction markets if they only work for politics and then maybe sports, although then it's a betting platform like others? Like, that's still a pretty big pie, right?
Well, so sports and racing is enormous. Betfair handles, billions of dollars in bets every year. It's just that politics isn't a huge part of it. So the other thing I would say, and this sort of goes back to the history of sort of betting exchanges, shall we say, what we used to call them, they weren't as successful as we expected. So betting exchanges were revolutionary. When Betfair launched in 2000 was really the first, because now there wasn't a bookmaker, so you weren't betting against the house. You weren't going to get limited, i.e., you could always bet. You could lay a bet. You could bet against a event. So they were revolutionary. And in sort of 2000 to 2004, 2005, like a lot of people sort of thought this was going to be the future of betting online. We weren't going to have sports books. That's turned out not to be the case. A bunch of reasons, some of which were the sports books just got a lot better. They, made it fast. They allowed you to do things like cash out. They allowed you to do things like in-play betting. Those were true inventions that were invented on betting exchanges, specifically Betfair. So the sports books got better. But the other thing that we didn't fully appreciate was that most sports bettors are retail consumers who are not as price sensitive as you think. They actually care about convenience and bonuses more than they care about, hey, I can get slightly better odds on this betting exchange than I can here. The betting exchange, by definition, is going to be more complex and confusing. And so the consumers just gravitated towards sports books where it was simple. It was a single price. They just got put the price on. The price wasn't as good, but they got a deposit bonus and they were happy. And so that's one of the things I would say. It's sort of the more of betting exchanges have largely failed their initial, I'd say initial hype period, more so than say prediction markets.
And like prediction markets of the past have had bad UI, right?
And I would say this cycle is definitely the best. Like it's like, probably 10x what the UI was. Like, 4 years ago, I think Predicted was sort of one of the dominant ones, and then Betfair would have been another one. As someone who lives in the US, you go to Betfair and you're going to get geo-blocked. I'm not even sure if you can. I think you can see the site, but you can't actually see the price history. Then the prices are in decimal odds, which to 90% of Americans is totally alien. It'll say something like Trump is 1.98. I know what that means. That means he's slightly better than odd. He's slightly better than evens. But they don't really make any effort to turn that into like, I want to go there and check out what the price is. And the price history is locked. Only logged in users can see it. So that's what it was 4 years ago. And then Predicted was like a very complicated, horrible UI, very difficult to get money in and out. So this cycle, you can go to Polymarket, you can go to Hedgehog, and you can see, bang, it's a percentage. I understand that. Well, some people understand it. Some people seem to think that if your candidate's favorite, that means they're going to win, which obviously we all know is not the case. But, that's still a problem. But you can still, that 51%, you've kind of an idea what that means, right? Whereas, 1.98, you don't. So definitely a lot better, 10x better than it was 4 years ago.
Yeah, and I think they're also, like, even if prediction markets aren't these vehicles that we collectively use to find truth quicker than news media or whatever, I think they're still helpful for surveying public opinion. Vitalik has written about this. But
yeah, I'm a fan. Like, I'm a fan of prediction markets. I've worked with them for 24 years, betting markets and prediction markets. Just the danger is, like, the importance is to understand their limitations. And a couple of them are, like, one is that they're really good in a limited set of places, elections being one of them. The other one is they're not prediction market may not be a good name for them because people think they predict, right? And they're like, when prediction market said that that I think Trump had like a less than 30% chance of winning in 2016, suddenly the market was wrong, right? Whenever he won, right? And everyone was like, oh my God, the market said, and so did the pollsters. The pollsters got it wrong as well. The market said that we're wrong, and they weren't. They basically said he's 2-1, right? Like, and that happens every day, but they're not a prediction of the future or probability. Where I think they're really useful, and what I like about them are things like news media 100 times a day comes up with a story that there's like significant, right? And they're like significant development in the Harris campaign. You go read about it, you go, yeah, that looks pretty bad, right? Like that's what happened in the market. Nothing happened in the market. And so that significant development is bullshit, right? And so I think the markets are great at saying, okay, what was significant? First debate, very significant. We saw it immediately in the market. And in fact, I felt that the market underweighted how significant it was that Biden clearly was going to drop out. Now, what happened after that, I didn't know. But so that was a very significant. The assassination attempt was significant, and how Trump responded, we saw that in the market. The VP pick, obviously the VP pick market was a market in itself, but the impact on the odds hasn't really changed anything. So a lot of these things that people sort of are pundits and journalists pretend are significant, they don't really move the market. And I think that's really useful because it's telling you something that the news media don't want to tell you, which is, you know what? You don't really need to read the news. You can just go check it. Nothing changed. So don't read any news today because there was no news, right? Like that's something I think they're really cool for. It actually saves me time reading the news. So I don't have to because I know nothing important happened.
However, there's times where prediction markets don't quite work well for the news. There was one today where people on Polymarket are upset because there was a prediction market on whether RFK Jr. would drop out, but he suspended his campaign.
Yeah.
Which means he functionally dropped out, but he can still accept donations, basically. And so that it's like a gray area. There was just
the nastiness of the real world. Like when we ran a prediction market in 2008. Spitzer resigned. We had a market on whether he would resign. He was governor of New York at the time. We had a market on whether he would resign by date X. He resigned effective after the date that we had set. So, like, did he resign before the date or after? And like, there was no right answer. And so, I think one thing I will say for prediction markets is they will get better at this. We'll have the case law, as it were. We're like, well, the RFK ruling means that if someone suspends, this is, we start to build a case law. And so I think we get better at those things, but those are still within the narrow category of yes or no, did he drop out or not? And we'll build up case law and we'll get more accepted. But it's kind of an example of the messiness of the real world.
Yeah. And like, this is something that I think the biggest reason as to why it's not just let users make any market they want, because when you have markets that trade as an AMM or CLOB and these yes/no shares are constantly trading and repricing, when you end up with an outcome like this, how do you resolve it? Because you can't easily set that to invalid because, then somebody's losing money or winning money just for no reason, basically. And then also resolving it one way or the other, people can argue both sides. So, there's a lot of nuance when it comes to, I guess it's more so on the creation side, because when you create the market and you basically set the outline of like, this is how it should be resolved, it's hard to take into account some of those black swan events. And that's where you get into these ambiguous like resolution disputes that happen with some of these markets. And that's why it is very hard to let users generate markets, which again is like something that we've been thinking about. And we've sort of found a quote unquote simple solution with a different market style so that we can allow users to create their own markets. And basically worst case scenario is if they are poorly worded or ambiguous in any way, you can mark them invalid and people get their money back. But these are more akin to like shorter term sports bets where you're putting on a bet with somebody else. You're not constantly trading and repricing these specific bets, and it allows you to unwind them. So now you can kind of open it up and allow other people to be part of the entire process and feel like they're making a more custom or niche bet, depending on what they want to bet on that day.
Yeah, Kyle, let's dive into that more, because I was looking around on Hedgehog Markets and I saw the create your own bet coming soon. And I was like, this sounds like a nightmare for hedgehog markets. Like, how do you keep, like, I just don't get how you pull that off without really angry users. So I'm just curious to hear a little more about how you're planning to, release that feature.
Yeah. So to start off simply, it's going to be sports, right? You can pull in sports. You can allow users to create that sport market. And kind of the path we're going down is like creating this permissionless protocol on Solana. So users can create the markets themselves. Anybody can then participate in it. And then we will have an optimistic oracle that can be used to resolve these markets. We don't have to touch anything. It's all kind of up to the users to partake in that. So with sports, the nice thing is you just pull in that data. Like the market terms are kind of known for those. So the user doesn't have to input anything. They just sort of click the creation and pay the small amount of fees to get that deployed on chain. So that's where we'll start. Then from there, you can kind of start to formulate certain more popular markets. So that's where you could bring in politics, Fed interest rates, up-down markets for crypto. And these are more of just like templates. So users can kind of come in, whether it's a completely fixed template or you allow users to have maybe one or two inputs, but basically being able to control what users can do and help them not have to make as many choices. So the choices are kind of determined for them and they can just tweak one or two of the inputs. And then that way, this way they can sort of see the wording, see how they get resolved, and they can still participate and they can spin up markets that they think will be the most interesting that they want to bet on or other people want to bet on. So that's kind of the plan for how we'll initially launch that. And then, kind of go from there, see what users are most interested in, what they ask for, and we can start to open it up more. I think if we go down the route of custom markets, that would probably be like, invite only type situation, where, if there are communities that want to make markets or a pooled parlay style bet, which is one that we're releasing with their community, we can sort of whitelist a specific wallet that will be able to create those markets themselves and be able to create, truly custom markets in a sense, and just sort of help them through that process so that the markets don't end up being ambiguous or hard to resolve. So that's kind of how we're looking at it and hoping that is more engaging with users and communities.
So is the idea here, I guess I'm curious why this is better for users than just spinning up the sports bets yourself.
Again, I guess that kind of goes in line with sort of that crypto-centric idea of permissionless, like fully on-chain markets where anybody can deploy these. So it's not just us making markets for other people constantly. So by allowing anybody to do it, it kind of works towards that goal of anybody making any type of markets maybe at some point. And so with that, there's different sort of incentives or reasons and like levers that you can pull. One of those is we have a baked in creator fee. So if you spin up markets, you would get a fee from that market, yourself just by creating it. So if you think it's going to be popular, it might be worth, paying the small fee to spin up on chain. And this kind of goes the same way with like meme coins. Let the users spin them up. Like as a team, Pumped Up Fun isn't going to go pick out memes and deploy them thinking, oh, this might be popular to trade. They're going to let the users, figure out, okay, this is a funny meme or it would be a funny community. So we'll let them spin it up. So that's kind of like the mindset and the idea, and I guess thesis of a new market type that we haven't really seen yet.
Fragmentation is a big problem for Ethereum, but also for the subscription industry. We all know the pain of tracking which subscriptions you're paying for and the hassle of trying to cancel them. Well, Access Protocol is here to help with a new way to consume content via staking. It's built on Solana and gives you an easy solution to stay up to date on what's happening in the industry by giving you access to your favorite publishers like CoinGecko, CryptoSlate, and a whole list of independent creators. The ACS token, that's the Access token, is staked to gain access to all of that creator's content without the hassle of managing a subscription. If you want to give it a try, check out the link in the show notes to claim a free NFT that gives you access to a creator's content. MyPrize is the first multiplayer casino where you can watch, chat, and play together with your friends. With over 500 games ranging from slots to live table games to the latest online casino favorites, there's something for everyone. Crypto is at the core of MyPrize, so you can play it anytime, anywhere. Get your friends, hop into your favorite creator's room, and see why winning is better together. Use the referral code Lightspeed when signing up to receive a 150% deposit bonus up to $300. Thanks again to MyPrize for sponsoring today's episode.
What's been your experience? I saw Hedgehog Markets put out like prediction market blinks. What's been the results with that?
Yeah, so I think those have been great for just low price, low barrier to entry. You can kind of get the product right in front of users. And so with, crypto Twitter and all of that, a lot of times the narrative is happening on Twitter itself. And so it's hard to say, if that's happening there, how do you then bring users away from that platform if they want to bet on that on our site? And so blinks are a great way to do that. You can reply to somebody, you can send it in a DM, and they'll unfurl. So if Solana and crypto natives are, sort of the first users that will be onboarding to our platform, this is just like a nice sort of low-hanging fruit, easy avenue to enable that on-ramping to the platform and just get used to these small bets. So, a lot of the fields that we have are just simple, like one-click buttons for like a $5 bet or a $10 bet that the user can place, and it just creates that transaction right there. They can also claim from that exact same tweet. So if you use bookmark it, you can come back to it later. And so there's actually a market about Mert moving out of Canada. That got shared on Twitter, and that did a lot of volume. And when you look at the transactions, you can see that, those are all being generated from those small, very easy to participate blinks. And that's also what we're going after with our pooled parlay style markets, which is sort of like a fixed small nominal entry. But then there's a big pool of funds, and you basically select the outcome for multiple questions. And then whoever gets the most correct wins the entire pool, or, might split it with a few other people. So I think like with crypto, there's a lot of it's very fast paced, meme coins are launched and die every single day. People want to, bet one soul to make 100 souls. So we were, sort of playing off of that same kind of mindset of, okay, who's the current active customer on Solana, and what might they enjoy or like to see?
Yeah, I'm trying to look up the odds. Okay, 89% chance Mert moves out of Canada by the end of 2024. I'm not gonna release any insider info on the pod, but that's funny to watch. I did see the blink.
You're going to bet on it later.
Yeah, I'm putting in my wallet info right now. Nigel, maybe to broaden this, you're working on a betting platform on Solana. Mm-hmm. I guess what I was curious about, just with your background. So I mentioned you were a co-founder at FanDuel. You also were CEO of a prediction market.
That's right.
Which,
yeah. So FanDuel, before became founder, was a prediction market.
Yeah.
Yes. We started it in 2007. It became FanDuel in 2009.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask, because obviously those are like fiat platforms, was particularly FanDuel. So, why have you made the pivot to crypto today? What's the benefit? I guess especially listeners to this podcast will be interested in Solana. What's the benefit of running prediction markets, betting markets on chain and on Solana?
Yeah. Well, let me give you sort of crypto in general and Solana specifically. So, I'm a huge crypto fan, and I have been for many years. However, crypto is actually not good at a lot of stuff. It's actually a very big, slow, and expensive database, and that's even the best of them compared against centralized options. And so if you're going to use crypto, you really have to have a good reason to do it. And so when a lot of these, startup ideas are like this, but with crypto, it's like, okay, good thing, but I've made it slower and more expensive and more difficult to develop. So usually not a good result. Two things that crypto are really good at, and only crypto, I'd say, arguably only crypto can do. One is payments, and the other is community. So if we go into those payments, if you're running a sports book, even an onshore one like say FanDuel, payments is one of your biggest problems. How do you get money from people onto the site? If you're dealing with a credit card, you're taking, at least 3%, but you're a high risk category, so it might be 5% per $100 deposited. You don't get all of that because also people are going to withdraw it. And so suddenly if you think you've got a decent margin, your margin is getting eaten by payments. If you're running a sports book like BetHog is, which is international, those costs are only bigger. Like trying to get credit card payments out of, Indonesia, right? And really, really difficult. Or even having somebody with a credit card in Indonesia who wants to use your site, really hard and really expensive. Crypto's incredible at that. It's also sort of fulfills crypto's kind of mission of like giving people control of their money where they can decide where to go. Like, I've had this experience plenty of times where the bank has stopped it because reasons, right? We don't want to send money there. And sportsbooks and crypto casinos have this huge problem of money getting stopped and refused, even if they can get, to the user. So that's the first one. Crypto's incredible at that. That's why BetHog is built on crypto. The second one that crypto is incredible at is community formation. Biggest issue with most consumer apps is not can you build a product and you build a really good product, is can you get a community around it who are not just users but really engaged and behind it. That's where crypto is really exceptional. It's kind of why I stayed in crypto sort of all these years, is just like when I look at meme coins and they're so simple, but when you see something that's simple that has such strong community that are really engaged and every day it's kind of part of their identity, that's really cool. And to me, that's something that I would love to see harness. So those are the sort of two things that only crypto can do, or certainly I think only crypto can do. And then why Solana? Solana 3 years ago could only do the first one well, right? Which is I need payments, I need it fast, I need it really cheap, right? 3 years ago when I started in Solana, today I think there are other options, but Solana is just the one with the best ecosystem for being fast and cheap. I'd say the rival might be like Base or Blast, but I don't think they're as complete in terms of like a DeFi ecosystem that Solana has today. So that's why Solana is really good for that. And then in terms of community, like, Solana has got the number, is the biggest meme coin community. It's got the biggest kind of consumer community. And then a third one I'd say, Riz, is like Solana is just focused on consumer. It's razor focused from day one when I started using Solana in early 2021. Like that's where all the focus was on. It wasn't about building L2s or really, it wasn't infrastructure for infrastructure. It was we need this infrastructure for these consumer applications. And that to me has been almost unique for Solana compared to any other chains that I've interacted with, which is that sort of focus on real consumer applications and continue to improve the chain for that and continue to build for that. So that's why, like, I've explored other chains like Blast, I think is interesting, Base is interesting, but Solana is still like today is like, if you're building consumer, that's where I think everyone should be building.
Mm-hmm. Kyle, I'm curious to ask you, like, you spoke a bit about permissionlessness as one of the benefits of building these things in crypto. Does Hedgehog Markets limit the size that you can bet, like, for an account?
No. So, like, the way all of our markets work and will work is basically you connect your wallet and you interact with the protocol itself. So, like, we're never escrowing your funds. You're not depositing and withdrawing onto a platform before placing a bet. Like, you're just interacting with the market, which is it's an on-chain program. You're just interacting directly with that market itself that's on chain. So no, we don't, restrict anything. There's no way for us to hold back your funds. You're not withdrawing back to a bank. So that's also, part of the permissionless nature where, you're not going to get restricted by some, casino or with like bank deposits, anything like that. And just to add on with like, why Solana, like obviously fast, cheap, consumer focused, that was all amazing. But also, having that all at the L1 layer, recently, I think it's probably like 2 months ago now, but we integrated with Lulo. And so the USDC in our pooled markets, and we've also integrated what will be released soon, which is the parlay markets and the peer-to-peer markets. But the USDC on the pooled markets right now, it gets deposited into whatever the highest yielding USDC borrow and lending protocol is. So that's all also done, on-chain permissionlessly, and then it goes back to the market when you pull it out. And that's able to earn yield. So it's kind of like another interesting avenue that isn't really possible anywhere else. Maybe there are some L2s that can do that now, but I still don't know that they have, as robust of a DeFi ecosystem or lending and borrowing protocols built out. I don't know how easy that composability is, but that's another like nice added benefit of building on top of Solana, and another way to leverage different potential market types as well in the future, as well as just different either revenue streams or ways to, interest users where it's like, okay, I'm earning yield if I am placing a longer term bet. So there's different, levers we can pull there and play around with, but I definitely think it's interesting. And we've seen also like LSTs get very popular recently with like validator specific liquid staking tokens. So whether it's that or just, putting USDC or, PayPal's new stablecoin or whatever it is and earning yield on it, I think there's also interesting ways that you can sort of leverage no loss prediction markets. So it's a way where you're not actually even risking money, but now you can basically earn yield on that and use that to pay out prize pools. So that was something we had played around with. However, DeFi wasn't as big back in 2020, 2021. The yields weren't quite the same. The TVL wasn't quite the same. And so I think like that could also be something interesting that, could be built or explored in the future as the ecosystem gets more and more robust. And, we sort of see, I guess, over a longer period of time, are these yields more sustainable? What is the average that's actually, maintaining? A lot of times we're seeing these juiced incentives or points programs, or with PayPal even, adding additional rewards to get adoption faster. So it's like, well, what does that actual yield sort of in the long run average out to be? So we are interested in watching those things as well. But yeah, the composability, the community, being able to build on the L1 itself, not have to worry about bridging for the user experience. Like those are all some of like the niceties of building on Solana.
So you say no loss prediction markets. Is the idea that the losing side is paid back and the winning side earns based on the yield that the locked funds generated?
Yeah, so there's actually some banks that have done this in the past, where it's like instead of getting like a 2% APY on your savings account at the bank, basically whatever money you have in the bank is like a ticket for like a monthly raffle, and the monthly raffle is basically they take all of the yield for all of the savings deposits and then they pay it out to like one raffle winner. So if like 2% is a nominal amount to you because you only have a couple $100 in there, why do you care about a couple dollars? Where it's like, okay, I'd rather just be entered into some lottery, even though my odds are very low. If I do hit it, it's much more, life changing in a sense. So that's kind of the idea around like no loss prediction markets. The biggest thing is that you need to have a big enough pool where the yield is, interesting. Or you could also use it as sort of like an onboarding, some like a customer acquisition cost, where you could juice the pools in addition to having yield, get users to sort of play these like free betting markets because you're not actually risking any capital, and then hoping that you convert over to something else, similar to what you see with Sportsbooks, where they say, your first bet is on us, or they'll match it, or whatever it is. So I think there's interesting things that you can also explore with that.
Those sportsbooks have to be losing so much money. I remember when New York legalized sports betting, and it was $1,000 in free bets.
Mm-hmm.
Which
Caesars?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you just do basic odds, it's like a free. I don't know. You double your money essentially, right? Just bet 50-50 and hedge.
Yeah. So the New York market opening saw probably some of the stupidest customer acquisition offers I've seen in 25 years in the sports betting industry, and Caesars was the main culprit. I think they went up to $1,500 deposit bonus with one-time rollover, and so I had people that I knew that never bet, and I was like, okay, here's what you do: you open an account, your friend opens an account, you bet opposite sides. And one of you is going to double. You're going to double your money. You're going to withdraw it, and they did it, and they went. Their market share in month one was something like 70%, and now I'm pretty sure it's below 10%. So they just drop so much money on users that they will never recover from. It was really, it was kind of like a once in a lifetime, like, oh my God, this is like the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Today, those offers have all gone away. In fact, they disappeared pretty quickly when Caesars figured out just how much money they were losing from users that they were never going to see again.
Yeah. I remember that. I never did it, but I was like, dang, I missed out on like a really, really insane subsidized kind of.
Yeah, there was, like there was a few other states, they're never not as high as that one, but like you definitely could have made a few $100 here and there, pretty much risk free. Although that being said, the reason the books do it is even the people that chase these bonuses, sometimes they come in, they chase the bonus, and then they're like, they get the money, and then they're like, oh, but those odds look pretty good as well. And before they know it, they have that user for life. So, those numbers didn't make sense, but like smaller deposit offers, deposit matches absolutely do make sense for them.
Yeah.
So, like a minute ago, I brought up permissionlessness and this is sort of just my personal vendetta, I guess you could say, with sports betting platforms. So, Nigel, I wanted to talk about this with you because after sports betting was legalized and became very mainstream over the past couple of years, I always wondered, why don't these are very liquid markets that have a lot of like dumb money in them. So why don't sophisticated investors just like whip up models to figure out where people's emotions are making them bet on the Dallas Cowboys, but like X small market team's going to win. Yeah. And what I found out the reason is that sportsbooks will ban you if you're like too good at betting, essentially, or they'll limit your daily bets to $1 or something like that. So there's like an art, and that like makes my blood boil a little bit because crypto somewhat fairly is labeled as a casino, and it's a casino where you could be hacked or whatever. But at the very least, no one is going to say, "Hey, you're not allowed to trade anymore. You've been too profitable in this casino." So I'm just curious what your take is on that, and if crypto is sort of offers a different way.
I would say, in the UK, I've often thought, where we've had like gambling advertising a lot longer, that the book should be taken to sort of court under the Advertising Standards Act or something like that, because it's not that what they're doing is wrong. It's a business, right? A casino is a business. If a user can go to the casino and be profitable like card counters, it's certainly up to the casino to say, we don't want your business. Where I have a problem with it is if you advertise to say like, hey, come and win loads of money, you could be, having this experience, but you can't win because we ensure that if you are a winner or we even suspect you're a winner, like I've had accounts limited and I'm not a great sports bettor, then you're not really delivering on what you're marketing, right? Your marketing is saying you can win, you can have this, you can win millions of dollars. And they're kind of really, the small print is, well, maybe in the short term you can, but if you do it too often, then we're going to ban you. And that's sort of where I have an issue with it. I think that betting exchanges or prediction markets are a huge opportunity. So 3 years ago, I started working on something I'm still on the board of called BetX, which is a betting exchange. It's focused on the international market. It's focused on sports. And it's very similar to Betfair in that way, which is there is no house. We don't limit customers. In fact, at the moment, we don't even charge a commission. The whole idea is that there should be a marketplace where people, if they are really sharp, can make money and trade with other people on it. And so that's the idea behind BetX. And it's built on Solana. And that's the opportunity that market should exist. Now, there's still place for retail that if, FanDuel and DraftKings, you're a punter, you're not going to bet, you don't have to deal with an exchange. But I think there should be a space for like a public market that can trade, and it would trade, BetX is still in development, but it could trade billions, trillions of dollars in sports bets at incredibly thin margins, and everyone could bet. No one's getting limited. Like no one gets limited in the stock exchange. Like no one gets limited on a crypto exchange because they're too profitable. that's kind of the ideal that's what BetDex is trying to achieve.
And is there, like, I'm curious, DraftKings will limit you because it's bad for them if you're really good at betting and they have to consistently give you payouts. Do, like, the way crypto markets and rails work allow you uniquely to not have to do those sorts of things, and you can just charge like a trading, fee?
Well, so what the way, just to explain how BetDex works. So BetDex is a broker built on a protocol called Monaco. Anyone can also build on Monaco, and we do have other people who've building on it, and bettors plugging directly into Monaco. Monaco is a betting protocol. It basically creates a smart contract around an event. Money goes in, and whenever the event happens, it settles and the money goes to the winner. What the broker does is it basically acts as just a front end to consumers into that protocol. And so it's totally permissionless. Anyone can spin up a contract around anything within it. And it's, it doesn't have a central agency. BetDex can't say, actually, we're now going to start charging, or we're going to limit users, because BetDex doesn't even know who the users are, and doesn't have the ability to limit them, doesn't have the ability to tax them. So because the Monaco is controlled by the Monaco protocol. So that's kind of the idea.
How does BetDex make money though?
Oh, so it's a broker. So BetDex is a broker on top, and what BetDex can do is charge a fee on top of it. And say, okay, but what we're going to do is we'll charge a BetDex fee if you want to use the Monaco protocol via our interface. That's how we charge a fee.
Okay, that makes sense. So for our last few minutes here, I guess, we've talked about the business of prediction markets. There is a segment of people in crypto, though, that think prediction markets can be a lot more than just places that you go to, bet on sports games or election outcomes. And this manifests in a lot of ways, but I guess I want to get into just a specific one, which is Futarchy. So this kind of new method of governance that was popularized on Solana by MetaDAO, where you have pass markets and fail markets for governance proposals. And according to MetaDAO, this is better than kind of one token, one vote, the broken state of DAO governance. So I'm just curious if either of you has a take on Futarchy, or is it a thing that can work, or is it just kind of this, fun thing to speculate about?
Actually, very familiar with Futarchy. I'm actually at MountainDAO right now, so talking to the MetaDAO team. And I
was MountainDAO, by the way.
It's really good. A lot of touching grass on the weekend, and then pretty much just like working 24/7 during the week. So it's definitely a good time. If anybody's building on Solana, definitely highly recommend MountainDAO checking it out. But yeah, I think Futarchy complements prediction markets in the sense that you're trying to figure out like which is the more positive EV outcome for something. So like MetaDAO more specifically, it's like someone will put up a proposal, and the idea is that you're trying to figure out, okay, should we pass this proposal or fail this proposal based on if it's going to be positive EV for MetaDAO itself and therefore the MetaDAO token. And so I think like this somewhat gets reflected in the stock market, but it's more of an after effect rather than a prior effect. So it's like when a CEO changes, you'll see the stock price either skyrocket or drop 15% the next day. In theory, what Futarchy solves for is like, well, instead of just making that change and then making it harder to undo it, you would set up and say, should this person be the CEO? So instead of trying to predict the outcome, you're trying to predict if this would be a good outcome. And so I think there's definitely some interesting things there that honestly probably make a lot of sense for publicly traded stocks. Like I think that Futarchy, if it could be applied, would be pretty interesting for some things there. Similar to like having a board vote, right? Like the board is trying to decide what is the best outcome for something. But then you see that reflected later in the financial market. So this is kind of flipping that and saying like, does the financial market think that this will be a good outcome? And then we'll implement it. I think the problem is the regulatory hangup, as it is with like a lot. It's just like it's a lot of red tape. It's hard to get through, and so it's like, well, it's not really worth it, and so nobody really pushes that forward. So I definitely am a fan of what they're doing. I am very interested to see how it plays out. I know they're building some tools to help DAOs be able to implement this. So they have this tradable token. You could even apply this to meme coins going forward, where you could take those meme coins and trade them around. Do we want to give grants, or do we want to advertise somewhere for the meme coin or the DAO or the project? So I think like Futarchy and prediction markets complement each other very well, and one's just kind of a precursor for the other.
I mean, I do think one thing is like prediction markets. I don't know if we've like said this explicitly, but at least I think that they're more suited for retail than for like sophisticated actors, I guess. And sometimes there is like it's made out to seem like Polymarket, for instance, in their terms and conditions will say you are encouraged to insider trade. If you have insider information, Polymarket is helping us get closer to the truth. And so you should trade based on the inside information you have. I do like if something like Futarchy is applied to corporate governance, I just do wonder if you have really big concerns with insider trading, the ways that people could manipulate these sorts of markets. I covered DAOs at Blockworks when I was an intern here. It was like my beat. And man, like those things don't work. And so Futarchy, I think, is very like, I'm happy to see it applied to DAOs because it's something new. It aligns incentives maybe. And the way DAO governance happens now is just ineffective. And really anything new, I would welcome. Nigel, do you have thoughts on Futarchy?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a terrible idea. I think, and I've been firsthand seeing DAOs, and I totally agree. They just don't work. They're kind of like communism. They look good in paper, and then once you get into one, you're like, oh my god, this is terrible. When you think about it, I live in a village here in New York, and I elect a representative. Actually, I don't because I'm a green card holder. But if I did, I'd have a vote, and I would, every couple of years get annoyed about certain things, and I'd vote for a candidate, and I'd lobby if they were doing things I didn't like. The idea that instead, and I know very little that goes on in the village, like a tiny bit. I'm annoyed about a couple of things, but mostly it was okay. The idea that I would have a vote on everything just makes no sense to me at all. And if I were to apply it within my startup, trying to have everyone have an opinion on what does the marketing team do? What does the product team do? There's a forum to get together, but as a startup, what makes sense to me is that we hire people that we trust in certain roles. And one of those roles is CEO, right? It kind of like, okay, we're going to trust you to make these decisions, right? Everyone has agency, so everyone can leave, right? Like this kind of, they're like, I don't like where this is going. I'm out of here. That's a very important part of it. And I think some people who've never been a CEO don't realize that the CEO is actually very mindful of that. They're like, good CEOs are they don't want to lose good talent, right? They're one of their top jobs is to get really good talent and keep them excited. And they're even more worried about not just people leaving, but somebody quiet quitting. They're like, yeah, whatever's fine. And then just quiet quitting. So, so you do, it might look from the outside that the CEO is all powerful, but actually that's not the case. Doing that in either whether in a DAO or a Futarchy, I just don't think makes it any better. And in fact, the optimal DAO structure that I've often joked is that the token holder should vote for a leader who should be there for at least a couple of years. And then that leader should pick deputy leaders who should be in charge of different departments. And if they don't do their job, the leader should fire them. And, basically the joke is I've just created a typical corporation, right? But that's the joke, right? But it's, startups are really, really, really hard. I actually think that structure is the right structure. I only scenario where I see DAOs work is where it is already quite a mature protocol. And you really only need certain consensus around upgrades. and those people that are running validators are really engaged. And it's not that sort of complicated anymore. It's like, okay, this is what we run, and maybe we vote on certain things. That's where I see it working. Whenever it's pre-product market fit, or even in a scaling stage, I think it's a disaster. And I think the reason we've seen for how many thousand we started is because it just doesn't really work. And I personally don't think it's through lack of tools or technologies or Futarchy or whatever it is. I just think that structure just doesn't work for doing stuff, in my view.
Do you think there's any broader application of like markets to decision making or truth?
Yeah, I do think. I think the technology itself really interesting. It's not had a great track record, right? Like, it's not this prediction market's been around a long time. I do think some things people who don't think of as markets, but if we look at community notes on Twitter, they're really good at truth seeking, right? They're not perfect. There's flaws in it. It could be that you could introduce some sort of staking element to it, that, you stake it, and if it's true, then, you do, and if it's not true, you get slashed. There are mechanisms like there that I think potentially you could explore, although, a lot of the times, and there's lots of economic research on this, like people's social status is much more than their financial status. So if you added money to it, you might actually make it worse. Like whenever you just say, well, why does this matter? Well, it's just your social status. People are like, I want to be right. And so like, why do, for example, like what would be a fair compensation for people in Wikipedia? Like it's important. The fair compensation is nothing, because if you started paying people, it wouldn't work. So, but I do think there are market mechanisms. Maybe it's their social status that you start to, you weigh up and down. Like people within Wikipedia can see who has status. Like this guy's amazing. Look at the number of edits they have. This girl's amazing. Look at the number of edits. But I do think that there's things around prediction markets that potentially we can use to kind of make those mechanisms better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm curious to see just if, I guess not in like a decision-making sense, but I do think that there's a real problem with how polls, like political polls, work.
Yeah, I don't know.
Both of the past two.
Polls tend to be inputs into markets. They're not, polls by no means are perfect. And I don't think they ever really, I think they're in a lot of ways got worse. People have become less trusting of them, or less trusting.
Yeah, we don't want to pick up our phones.
We don't pick up our phones. You even want to give them a truthful answer. So there's a lot of issues around it. I feel the markets are better aggregators of knowledge as opposed to like finders of truth. And in an election scenario, and you see that sometimes, it's rare now, but sometimes a significant poll comes out and the market moves. It doesn't happen the other way around. The market doesn't move, and then unless there's an insider at the poll, right? Like that's a thing. So I'm not sure the markets can replace polls. If we lived in a world where there was no polls, I think you would find the markets are a lot more sort of erratic because they don't have these sources of information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we're running over time. My editor's going to yell at me. Kyle, I'm going to throw the last question to you here, which is, we started out this podcast kind of talking about can prediction markets thrive, survive, whatever, past the election. In 1 year from now, it's late August, we're recording this. What does success look like for Hedgehog Markets?
Yeah, so I guess to just start off, I would say yes. And then I would say success looks like more community-derived markets or user-derived markets. I think it might potentially be a slightly different twist than what everybody sort of thinks of as prediction markets right now. And I guess in a simple format, it's kind of like peer-to-peer betting. But I think they'll take a slightly different form is kind of what I'm getting at. I think there's other avenues that haven't really been explored. And I think that these other avenues need to be explored to find, I think, more staying power outside of this election hype cycle. Because I think those markets require market makers and liquidity, and a lot of trading. And I think there are markets that are good for that. Like, there might be enough traders for Fed interest rates, politics, and even for like sports betting, having like a decentralized like order book for sports. But when you get into more niche prediction markets or the long tail prediction markets that people still want, I think we need to sort of change how we think about them and how people can approach them and make them more user friendly and easier to spin up and not just from a centralized source.
Yeah. More community in 1 year is the bar. But
yes,
you guys, it's been a great conversation, Nigel and Kyle. I hope we were able to bury the hatchet a little bit here with some of our disagreements. But in all seriousness, I think it's been really enlightening. And thank you guys so much for coming on the pod.
That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, take care, guys.